Hello Bookstack, welcome to this week's book club review. Hey there Bookstackers, hope you guys are enjoying the book as much as I am. This past week we read chapters 3, 4, and 5. I'm hoping that you're finding them enlightening, and I'm hoping it's taking your reading to a whole other level and you are learning a lot. Let's get started with chapter 3, the first level of reading, elementary reading. So you got to get started off talking about that it's been a tradition in America to educate our populace, and the ability to read is kind of the cornerstone of the American ideal, and it really helps move our country forward. I was reading the other day that it can cost our country billions of dollars by people not being able to read, and I'm going to deal with that in another video, but it's people not being able to fill out job applications, not be able to perform high-level jobs that maybe get shipped overseas, all because people are illiterate and don't know how to read. It costs them and our country a lot of money. But further than that, it's the democratic ideal, because not being able to understand and think about and ruminate about issues and policies that politicians are writing and putting out in the newspapers, the inability to really process that information really kind of eats away and erodes at the democratic ideal that our nation is founded upon. But that's material for another video. He gets started here with the stages of reading. The first stage is reading readiness, and this is when a child is ready to begin to learn how to read. And if he's being taught before he's ready to learn, that may cause some frustration in him, and he may carry that frustration forward in his academic career as he begins to learn other things and enters into school and begins to learn at a faster pace. And that's really not what we want. We don't want a child's first experience with education, especially with reading, to be a frustrating experience. And we want to make sure that our children are ready to read before they enter school and before they're being taught. And you can do this by reading to your kids, exposing them to words, maybe reading out loud in the home so they're being familiarized with it, pointing out sounds and words to them, making sure they're familiar with their alphabet, just some basic things to make sure they're reading readiness. But that's the first stage of learning to read. In the second stage, the child learns to read very simple materials, and this is where things like Dr. Seuss and the Berenstain Bears and things like that come in handy, where it's just very simple words, very simple sentence structure. But a lot of these books, even though they're written very simply so that even children can understand and read them, they still have very powerful thoughts and ideas in them that both the children and the parents reading the book to the children can benefit from. In the third stage of reading, this is where the child is beginning to really build their vocabulary, and they're able to do this because they're learning to unlock the meaning of unfamiliar words through context clues. And they're also reading several books, and they're beginning to be able to compare the ideas and the different books they're reading and kind of put them in context of the whole. And this is really kind of a first introduction into some topical reading, which we'll deal with at the end of the book. Ideally, this is the foundation that the child is going to build their entire academic career on, is this ability to learn new things, put things into context, and really enter into the conversation that's being had, again, through scholars throughout the history of time. And this is where things can also go very wrong because, as they enter into different social dynamics, even home life, economic situations, can all lead to the deprivation of this love for reading and this love for learning. If it's not prized in the home, if it's not prized by the friends that they associate themselves with, it can really lead to an eroding of a love and even a concern for education and learning. If it's not prized at home, and if it's not made a priority by the parents and by the social structure surrounding the child, it can really lead to just an unappreciation of the education that they're being given by society. And if this very basic rudimentary level of reading isn't obtained, then obviously the higher levels of reading and learning aren't going to be very successful. And again, if the rudimentary levels of reading and learning aren't obtained by the child, then it's going to be very difficult for them to grasp these higher levels of reading, higher levels of learning that are necessary to operate in society at a higher level. Moving into higher levels of reading and higher education, he talks about high schools should produce students who are great analytical readers, and great colleges should produce students who are great syntopical readers. And most oftentimes we don't find that that's the case, that typically it's as you move through college that you become an analytical reader, and then maybe as you're a graduate student you begin to learn how to read syntopically, and that really should not be the case. Anyone who graduates from college should be able to read syntopically and be able to do independent research on any subject. They should be able to read any material made for the general public and formulate their own ideas and opinions. Again, independent research that you do on your own, that you're able to do on your own, will lead to independent thoughts and independent ideas that you come to the conclusion yourself, rather than having them handed to you. Now again, if you talk about 12 years of schooling, 4 years of undergraduate, maybe another 4 years of graduate school, that's 20 years of schooling, and it really should not take that long to learn how to read properly. Again, this is part of the idea behind Bookstack, because this is probably something that we didn't learn. I know that I didn't learn in high school and in college. I didn't learn how to read syntopically. It wasn't something that was really pushed and taught. It was kind of something that you were just made to do without really truly understanding the ideas, concepts, and tools necessary to accomplish the task that you were given, such as writing a research paper. It's just, give me 3 book references, 2 online references, and maybe a first-person reference, and then that was it. But you really weren't told how to necessarily formulate these ideas. This is the thing: if you have an idea, a thought, a concern, you should be able to research it yourself, read, get the ideas, and come to conclusions, read syntopically, and become well-rounded on that idea. You shouldn't necessarily be subject to the ideas and the mental machinations of another person. You should be able to understand for yourself the thoughts and ideas that you find important to you. And that concludes my thoughts on Chapter 3. Chapter 4, the second level of reading, Inspectional Reading. The first thing to realize is that there are 2 types of inspectional reading. The first is systematic skimming or pre-reading. And this is when you're not really sure if you want to read the book, if it's worth reading, and also you have a limited amount of time in order to figure this out. What you're going to do is you're going to skim the book. You're just going to read through and find out what the book is about. You're going to see maybe the major points. You're going to separate the chaff from the kernels, the things that don't really matter from what really matters. And in fact, you may actually get all there is to get out of a book by skimming it systematically and reading just those important parts. Your main aim here is to find out whether the book requires or even deserves a more careful reading. And here's how you go about doing that. First, you're going to look at the title page, and if the book has one, the preface, and you're going to read that very briefly. Number 2, you're going to study the table of contents. Third, you're going to check the index. And fourth, you're going to look at the publisher's blurb. Fifth, you're going to look at the chapters that seem to be very important and pivotal to the author's point. And 6, you're just kind of skim the book and read a few paragraphs here or there, read maybe a couple of pages in sequence, and then skip to something else, just to kind of get a real feel and idea for the book. When you perform these tasks, it actually accomplishes a couple of things. Number 1, it lets you know if the book contains information that you want, if it interests you, if it has a level of understanding that you're looking to attain. And the other thing is, when you skim the book, it gives you enough information to know in the future if you come across, a question, or if you're looking to research something, or you're looking for a particular book on a particular subject, you now have enough information about the book to know if it would be helpful in this new endeavor. Level 2 of inspectional reading is superficial reading. Now, this is when you're dealing with a book that may be difficult to understand, maybe a little bit harder to read than you're used to. You should read it through without ever stopping to look up the things that trouble you or the words that you don't quite understand. Now, I know this kind of is counterintuitive. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you can really get bogged down in just dealing with frustration with reading a difficult work. Can just cause you to, toil away fruitlessly without ever reaching the end, and really just becoming kind of disenfranchised from the book altogether, and maybe even the entire subject. And so when you kind of push through a book very slowly, you're looking up everything that you don't understand. By the time that you do reach the end of the book, you can kind of lose sight of the beginning, and in doing so, you kind of lose sight of the whole book and all. So yeah, you did push through and you did finish it, but the understanding that you're really trying to reach isn't there, because it may have taken you too long, and your information and your knowledge of the book may be too segmented to really truly appreciate the work as a whole. If you allow yourself to get stalled and tripped up, you can really become lost in a book, and this actually serves to impede our reading truly rather than helping it. Reading all the way through a work before going back and looking at the difficult sections can actually help you make sense of those difficult sections that you don't quite understand, because it puts them in context and you can truly understand what the author's trying to say, so it can help you understand in a particular section what it is he's actually saying. You can really come to terms with the book and understand the terms and the phrases, the arguments, and ultimately the conclusions that the author is making. Next, he moves on to talk about reading speeds, and he has a great quote here. It's rather lengthy, but I want to read it because I think it's very beneficial and it's very clear to hear it in its entirety. The obstacles that stand in the way of comprehension of a difficult book are not ordinarily, and perhaps never primarily, physiological or psychological. They arise because the reader simply does not know what to do when approaching a difficult and rewarding book. He does not know the rules of reading. He does not know how to marshal his intellectual resources for the task. No matter how quickly he reads, he will be no better off if, as is too often true, he does not know what he is looking for and does not know when he has found it. So as we've talked about before on reading speeds, every book, every work has information and material that isn't as important as other material. Typically you'll have a main thesis or a statement that is very important that the author is really trying to prove and to put forth into your understanding. And then he has, several maybe supporting lines and stories and ideas that maybe aren't as important as the actual main truth itself. So the main truth deserves more attention, a more careful reading, while sometimes the supporting, information and material doesn't require that level of, detailed and enduring reading. You can actually read through it very quickly and still obtain the same amount of information, the same amount of understanding that the author is trying to get you to. He moves on to the problem of comprehension, and of course this book specifically is written for the sake of improving understanding, improving comprehension, dealing primarily with analytical reading. As we've talked about before, analytical reading is specifically used to increase understanding and comprehension of a book, and that's really the main goal. Again, we're not looking to read just a bunch of books throughout the year. We truly want to gain understanding and insight from the books and the works that we read. Finally, he comes to the summary of inspectional reading, and he has this quote. He says that no work should be read more slowly than it deserves, and no more quickly than you can read it with satisfaction and comprehension. I know a lot of people are always worried about how fast they read, especially how fast they read compared to other people, but just know that the main goal and the main point is satisfaction in reading and comprehension reading. So long as you're reading at a pace that allows you to enjoy the book and also allows you to get understanding and comprehension of the book, that's the speed at which you should be reading, and you should be satisfied with that. And as you read and you continue to exercise these skills, you find that your reading speed will increase and your comprehension also increases with the more that you read and the more that you study. And also you should keep in mind that inspectional reading is a very important part and aspect of reading analytically, and we'll see how that fits in with the whole part in the coming chapters. And that concludes my thoughts on Chapter 4, Inspectional Reading. And finally this week we come to Chapter 5, where he talks about how to be a demanding reader. In order to be a demanding reader, you must ask yourself questions that you are trying to answer in the course of your reading. The first being, what is this book about? What is being said in detail, and how is it being said? Number 3, is the book true, in part, in whole? When you understand a book, you are obligated, if you are reading seriously, to make up your own mind about the book. Understanding the author's mind is not enough. And then we come to the fourth question that you have to ask yourself if you're reading seriously. What of it? Who cares? What is the book saying beyond the actual four corners of the book, and why is it relevant and why is it important? If you're reading for enlightenment, you must understand what is beyond or what is implied or suggested by the truths contained in the book itself. Reading a book beyond the elementary level is asking questions and reading for the purpose of getting answers. If you don't ask any questions, then you're not going to get any answers. Knowing what the questions are is not enough. You must ask them as you read. And the art and the habit of asking these questions as you read is the art and habit of being a demanding reader. Good books by nature and definition are above our head. We have to reach up to understand what it is that they're saying. And it is not the trying to stretch ourselves to come to a point that we understand these books that frustrates us. It's reaching unsuccessfully and not having the appropriate skill and techniques to stretch our understanding and to stretch our mind to obtain this knowledge that truly wearies us. And this is what this book's trying to give us, is the techniques and the skill to reach these great books, these good books that are beyond our understanding, and bring them to the point where we do understand them and assimilate the knowledge into our mind. In order to keep reading actively, you must not only will to do so or want to do so, but you must also have the skill necessary to do it. And this art and this skill helps us master the techniques to bring ourselves up to the level of understanding that would seem to be beyond us at first. Now, again, this book is truly about making it your own and making it a part of you. And this next part tends to be a little bit controversial. It was not something that I ascribed to in the past. It's something I'm kind of getting better at, but it's about writing in your book. Typically, when you have thoughts and ideas, they express themselves in words, and those ideas and words should be written down. And it does help to really assimilate a book into your knowledge and your reading for understanding, to write and actually take notes in the book as you're reading. Writing your reactions down actually helps you to remember them in the future. It also kind of helps you keep pace. So as you go back in the book, you can see where you had your different thoughts and ideas and how they correspond to what the author was saying. And, you can write down the things that you agree and where you disagree with the author. You as the reader have the obligation to put yourself into the work by either agreeing or disagreeing. And just because the person's really smart and they wrote a long time ago and they have a special name that people remember throughout history, doesn't mean that you can't disagree with them and that what they're saying is automatically correct. You can write there in the margin, agree or disagree, and take your notes right alongside the words that they're spoken. And you're almost obligated by the author to take their work seriously, because they took it seriously enough to think about it and to write it down. And now you're taking it seriously by expressing your thoughts and opinions in the book right alongside theirs. Now, there's a few techniques he talks about in the book for marking up a book. One is underlining, and that's pretty obvious. You're underlining a sentence that is especially meaningful to you, or maybe if the author is stating a thesis or stating his main point, that'd be good to underline. Number two, you can do vertical lines in the margin. I do that sometimes when the whole paragraph is really good and meaningful to me, and I think it's has a clear, concise, cogent argument. I will put a little mark above the paragraph down the side of the margin, and then kind of cup it, maybe like a little bracket around the paragraph, to help me know that that whole paragraph is something that I should keep in mind. Number three, you can have a star or asterisk or any other marking in the margin to kind of mark a specific part in the argument or passage that you found meaningful. Another thing that you can do is number. A lot of times you have an argument that's going on, or the author is explaining something, and you'll have his first point, his second point, his third point. That'd be meaningful to mark those as the 1, 2, and 3 as you're going. So if you're looking to go back and pull out the specific points that the author was making, you can have those in order. Number 5, you can have numbers of pages in the margin. So if the author is saying something that reminds you of a different point, or he was referring back to something he said in a previous chapter or on a previous page, it might be helpful to write that page down next to that particular passage. Another thing he has here, number 6, is circling keywords and phrases. Again, this is really going to come important when we start to read analytically. We understand terms and phrases, but if the author is stating a term that's very important to the work, or a phrase or an argument, it would be helpful to underline that so it's easy to come back and reference it in the future. And 7th, he talks about writing in the margin or at the top or bottom of the page, and all of this serves to express your intellectual ownership of the book. Next, we move to the part where he talks about the 3 different kinds of note-taking. The questions answered by inspectional reading are threefold. 1, what kind of book is it? What kind of book or what type of book are we dealing with? Number 2, what is the book about as a whole? And number 3, what are the parts of the book and how is it structured? So these are basically, at the beginning when you're taking notes, they are structural note-taking. And you kind of really get a feel for this by dealing with the preface and the table of contents. Next, you're taking conceptual notes that deal with the concepts and the truths contained in the book. They're mainly concerned with the concepts of the author, but also with the concepts that you have come up with and the ideas that you have formed by reading the book. You can also take syntopical notes. If a particular part of the book reminds you of another book or makes you think of ideas held in another work by another author, you can put those notes inside the book as well to refer to that specific work or author. And next you have dialectical notes that talk about the shape of the discussion of the book. And this is where you really start to put the ideas and concepts in order around a central theme or idea. Now we come to the final part where he talks about forming the habit of reading. And he talks about that the way to form the habit of an operation is to perform that operation itself. He talks about the art of something that can be taught consists in learning the rules, but the operation of something that has been taught, or the art that has been taught, is operating and performing the task within the confines and bounds of the rules. He talks about learning to ski, and when you first learn to ski, as I have, it's very complicated. There are a lot of different things that you have to do all at the same time. Performance of muscles and techniques and things that you're not used to. But as you learn them and as you become better at them, they become less mindful and more automatic. And it's the same with reading. When it's done by an expert, it just happens and it flows, and it's it's art and it's graceful. But when done by a beginner, it can be frustrating and slow and awkward. But that's okay, because the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. The point is to forget them as separate acts and perform them as one graceful movement. The complexity of the whole thing points to the formation of one habit, not several different distinct habits, but all of this should coalesce into one art, and that is the art of reading well. And that concludes my thoughts on chapter 5, and I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope it was enlightening. We have completed the first part of the book, and it really did a lot for me to already take my reading to another level, and part 2 was even more instrumental in helping me learn to read analytically and moving into the art of reading syntopically. And so I really hope that it's moving you along as well. So next week we're going to be in part 2. We're going to be reading chapters 6 and 7. Now, I'm putting this video out earlier in the week than I normally would. Normally I would release it on a Saturday morning. I'm going to release it earlier in the week. That way maybe more people have an opportunity to watch it. We're still going to have the meeting on Saturday. We're going to have it earlier in the day. I've spoken with some fellow book stackers, and they said that having it earlier in the day would probably be more convenient. So hopefully you're able to join us. It's going to be Saturday. We're going to do it at 10 a.m. This coming Saturday. The Zoom app, again, the description is going to contain the links and all of the details for that meeting. Again, I'm recording the meetings, we're releasing them afterwards, but if you come to the meeting, you can participate in the conversation and share your ideas and thoughts on the book and what we've read so far. I really hope that you're enjoying it. Don't forget to share these videos with your friends. If you have someone that you think would benefit from watching these videos and reading through the book with you, I hope you're doing it with a group so that you can discuss it as we go along. But don't forget to share this video on Facebook as well as on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at @mybookstack. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.